Hello friends, it is nice to see you again. It has been a week since I posted my last video. Today is the 14th of September and fall is in the air. I took a walk this morning in 50-degree weather. It was awesome. I'm loving that. It is 80 degrees now though, so I'm sitting in my car. It's a little bit warm and that's a little bit of a bummer. I love the cozy weather, but, I hope that you are enjoying some fall activities and that you had, you're having a really great weekend. Welcome to Words of Ex-Mormon. I'm a little bit nervous to talk to you today. I've had a little bit of a kind of a weird week. I'm feeling a lot of feelings about things. And I really hope that what I'm going to talk about doesn't come out completely disjointed. I'm going to try to, I'm pretty good at talking myself in kind of in a dance that gets everything in and kind of brings things around to connect and everything. I'm pretty good at that, I think. So hopefully this works out. I am going to be reading a lot, which I don't like to do. I like to be off script most of the time, but there are some talks and things that I'm going to be referencing, some websites that I'm going to reference and such. And so I do want to make sure that those are correct. And so that might be a little bit weird. If I say more than normal, I do apologize. I know that when I am reading and I'm kind of looking for my spot, then I tend to say more. It's really annoying. I do apologize. I will try my very hardest not to have that be a problem. But I am going to read some things. I don't like to focus too much on the facts. Again, I've said in my other videos, I don't want to talk about the truth claims of the church. I want to talk about my experiences only. There are other places that do those truth claims really well and have resources and things for you. So I don't really want to do that. But when I am quoting a talk or something, I want it to be correct. I want dates to be correct, etc. So I will read some of those things. As most of you know, this week marked President Nelson's 100th birthday. He turned 100 years old on Monday, which is pretty awesome. That is a long time to live. That's great. I don't know what else to say about that. It is, 100 years is impressive. It is a little bit weird to me, though, that people are treating this as like some kind of personal accomplishment because nobody really has control over how long they live. It's not like he did something specifically right. You can take care of your body. You can stay away from things that, smoking and drinking that cause cancer, and, you can eat healthy, you can exercise. But it's really a luck of the draw, and it's, we just really don't control how long we naturally live. So it's just kind of a little bit strange that it's being treated like this personal accomplishment. And while President Nelson has had a lifetime worth of great accomplishments, which include he shortened out a church to 2 hours, which was fantastic. Everybody I know was really happy about that. Nobody needs 3 hours of church. The less, the better. So awesome. He is, of course, a world-renowned heart surgeon. Everybody knows that. He saved thousands of lives, which is fantastic as well. He has invented life-saving devices and made breakthroughs in medical tech. He speaks lots of languages, which is pretty awesome. I only speak 1, 2 if you count sign language, which I'm really rusty on. So that's pretty cool. And I really appreciate that during COVID, he supported masks, social distancing, and vaccinations. So you know, he's done a lot of great things in his life, and by no means do I want to discount those things that he has done. However, there are some pretty suspicious and sketchy things about him that he's done as well, and those are the kinds of things that I do want to talk about today. Before President Nelson became a prophet, I don't really remember much about him. I think that he's, as far as my youth and growing up, I think he was always in the quorum of the 12. I grew up under President Hinckley for the most part. He was kind of the prophet of my youth, and I feel like all of the apostles at the time, like Hinckley was prophet for a long time. And so the other apostles tended to just be kind of vague to me. I feel like I didn't hear much from him, and so therefore I don't really have a lot of opinion about him before Hinckley became, or while Hinckley was while I was growing up, even during Monson's presidency. However, the very first thing that we need to talk about, the sketchy kind of things that he did, was back in 2015, which was the ban on baptisms for children of gay couples. And that happened in 2015, and during that time, Monson was the president of the church. And while these are rumors and speculation, but the rumors and speculation do come from close family and people who worked closely with his family, that as early as 2010, President Monson had been suffering from dementia, and which caused things like outbursts and just that it was difficult for him to remember things, and so there was also in 2015 as well, the church's spokesperson officially made a statement saying that he was feeling the effects of his age, and they did very, very much limit the amount of talks and appearances that he made from there on out. So it was also very visible to the church and the people of the church that we could see how frail and how just ill President Monson was. And so while Monson was the official prophet at that time, I really have no doubt that Russell M. Nelson took over as acting president before anyone really knew it. And you know, that started with the 2015 ban. I do feel like Oaks, being second to Nelson, only next in line after Nelson, probably had a lot to do with it as well, as both of these men are infamously homophobic. I do feel like Oaks is even more so, and so therefore I feel that the two of them worked together on this, and they did say several times in talks and in announcements and things like that, that they did feel that the ban was a revelation from God, and that they were told that this was the thing to do. Now, that's bad in and of itself, and I lost friends over it because I stayed a member of the church through it. I did struggle with it. I had problems with it, but I didn't leave the church. That does break my heart because, as I have expressed previously, I do feel like just shutting up about things and keeping the peace and everything really it's still support. It's still support of the church, and I think it's necessary and important for us to be speaking out against things that are social injustices. But even further, and this is something that I've more recently learned, because it wasn't done in a conference setting, it was done in a talk given at BYU in 2017. And Russell M. Nelson talked about the revocation of the ban in 2015, and he said, "The First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 have continued to seek the Lord's guidance and to plead with him in behalf of his children who were affected by the 2015 policy. We knew this policy created concern and confusion for some and heartache for others. That grieved us. Whenever the sons and daughters of God weep, for whatever reasons, we weep. So our supplications to the Lord continued. We also took note of the LGBT parents who sought permission from the First Presidency for their children to be baptized. In nearly every case in which the LGBTQ parents agreed to teach their children about and be supportive of the covenant of baptism, the request and exception was granted." This is where it gets sketch. "As a result of our continued supplication," meaning their pleas to God, "we felt recently directed to adjust the policy." While I was very happy that the ban was lifted, what bothers me most about this talk is just that Nelson literally blames God and was like, no, it was him. It was his fault. It was his fault because he told us to do this. And then he talks about himself and the other quorum members as though they're like a savior for us. A savior for the people because we were sad and we were weeping. And so they continued in supplication to God to ask him to please remove this burden. Like it's so like, it's just like a situation where he makes a problem and then makes himself the solution to the problem. And it's just gross. It grosses me out. So while I was happy with that, it's such a gaslighty, like everything is so gaslighty. No, it wasn't us. It wasn't us that put this into place. It couldn't have possibly been our homophobia. No, it was God. Heavenly Father told us that you guys can't baptize your kids, but we kept praying for you. I feel like, was there nothing, like, I don't know if I dare say this, because when Joseph Smith continued to pray to God to get a yes answer for sharing the papers of the Book of Mormon, they came up missing and they were lost. So we're always taught, well, you don't continue to ask God for a different answer after you've received an answer, because then you might get that answer, but it's the wrong answer. And so then you will suffer for it. But I don't feel like that's what that is here. Like, we're told not to do that. And if that were true, that they didn't continue supplicating for us, didn't continue praying for this to be lifted, then it would still be in effect, would be terrible. So it's a good thing that they did, but it goes against their own teachings. And if God is really God and he really knows all and he knows what's best for us, then this wouldn't have been a thing in the first place, if you know what I mean. Anyway, the lessened church time. While I was happy with that, the lessened church time to 2 hours, that also came with Come Follow Me. And a lot of people really rejoiced about that. This was a great thing. And, it is. So it was to me. I was excited about that, but also, and if it was something that was wonderful for you and you were very happy, even if you're still happy with it and everything, then I remind you that maybe this isn't for you. We don't all have to have the same experiences, but it's not okay for you to tell me or anybody else that our experiences or our feelings about it aren't correct or that we don't understand them. So for me, my experience with this was that the 2-hour church was great, but then there was the emphasis on Come Follow Me and the home-centered church and church-supported religion, which meant that there was even more pressure and expectation on my shoulders as the woman and as the mother. Even the family proclamation says that it is primarily the mother's responsibility to teach the spiritual well-being of her children. And that's even coming from somebody. I've always had a very supportive husband. When this came out, I was married to my second husband, who I'm still married to, but he's very supportive. He was a worthy priesthood holder and a good father and very kind and loving and everything, but it was still me. It's still my responsibility. And so every woman that I talked to, every woman that I know, and again, if you were rejoicing about this and you were like, yes, it really should be taught in the home and just supported by the church, then yay for you. I'm really happy for you. I'm happy that you're happy, but that was not necessarily the experience of everybody that even if we were rejoicing about it and we thought the Come Follow Me is wonderful material and information, which I did at the time, even if we felt that way, we still felt the immense pressure of, the church, which is already carried by women. We felt even more. There's less for the husbands to do, less for the men to do, more for the women. Moving on, number 3, during Nelson's presidency in 2019, the church did launch an abuse prevention training for anyone who would be working in close proximity to the youth. I went through this training 3 different times for whatever callings that I had. It's fine. It's a video. It's like a series of videos, and you watch it, you answer some questions. It's things like, one leader cannot be alone with children. You can't, like a young women leader, young men's leader can't take one child with them to pick up supplies or to be dropped off. If you're going to be driving anybody, you need to have multiple children with you, or you have to have multiple adults, and nobody should be alone with a child that is not your child. Things like that, things about what's appropriate, not appropriate, touching kinds of things. And like I was in the nursery at one point, and I wouldn't even be able to take a child to their parent by myself. I would have to take another leader with me and that's why there's 4 people in the nursery, because sometimes you have to go somewhere and take a child to get changed by their parents, or, maybe a baby's crying and they need to see their mom. And so you'd have to take an adult with you to go find the parent, and then you'd have to leave the other children with an adult and another adult. So I did go through that multiple times, so I do have experience with that, and it was fine. But this church still does not require fingerprinting and background checks for people who are going to be around children and youth. They also still do not, they still have the hotline. And I don't know if you've heard about the hotline. It has been in place since 1995. And you'd think that, that sounds like a good thing, that if there's an abuse being reported, then the bishops call this hotline. And this is where I'm going to read a lot. And I'm sorry if I say, if I get lost. I want to make sure I get this right. Now, bishops are told to call this hotline. And honestly, this is a whole other video that I could do. I'm not going to, because there's a lot of dates, there's a lot of names, there's a lot of information involved. And while I have strong feelings about this, and this is a massive thing and I actually didn't find out about this stuff until after I had left the church. It's stuff that they keep quiet. They don't tell you about it. So this wasn't part of my shelf breaker or anything like that, because I didn't know about it until later. So it's stuff that I've recently learned, and I'm going to tell you about it here and not do a whole video, because it's not my experience, and I do want to keep everything about my experiences, but this is a problem, and I think that people need to know about it, and it's a big issue for me. This is one thing solidifying that I would never, ever go back to church for any reason, even if they proved it was true. As long as this stuff exists, I would never go back to church, to the LDS church. Now, For those who don't know, okay, the hotline, bishops are told to call whenever they're made of any kind of abuse. However, in the last several years, since about 2022 or so, there has been some corruption, not some, but like a lot of corruption that have come to light because of lawsuits that have been coming about. In the specific case, it's called the Bisbee case from Arizona. You can Google it. There's a lot of information. It's absolutely insane. But in this case, 3 children are suing 2 bishops from their Bisbee ward in Arizona because 2 separate bishops during different bishoprics, knew about the extensive and continuing sexual abuse of 2 of the children by their father, who had confessed to the bishops. In this case, the bishops had shed light on the abuse that the abuse hotline goes to, not to authorities, but to the Curtin McConkie offices, which is a law firm here in Utah that represents the church. And these bishops were advised not to report the abuse because they could be sued by the offenders, because it would be breaching confidentiality between clergy and penitent. Never mind that Arizona law does grant immunity to clergy reporting abuse. But that's the feedback that the Curtin McConkie offices gave to these bishops when they called the hotline, was that they should not report it, because if they did, they could be sued by the abuser for betraying confidentiality because he was the bishop. So it was also found during the investigation that social workers said under oath that when they received calls that presented risk to the church, such as abuse by a prominent church member or during church activities or egregious reports of abuse, that they refer to the Curtin McConkie, and the church. They report to Curtin McConkie, and the church maintains that the calls made to the firm are protected by client privilege. So again, it's stuff that doesn't have to be reported. Furthermore, the social workers destroy recordings of calls at the end of the day. So again, there's no evidence of the abuse that can be reported to authorities. So there's a lot of abuse here, a lot. There's a website that you can actually Google. I haven't figured out how to attach links yet to these things, so I do apologize. I do need to figure that out. I'm sorry, but you can Google all of this, the Bisbee, Arizona case, and also there's a website that you can look for. It's Miller and Zois. It's Miller, MillerAndZois.com, and you can Google that, Miller and Zois LDS church abuse lawsuits, and they have a whole database which includes recent settlement cases between 2018 and now, where the victims were given literally millions of dollars to basically drop things and shut up about it. And while all of this, like I said, could be its own video, it's just, I don't want to make its own video, but I just want to say that this is happening under President Nelson right now and 12 other men who are they have to be aware, right? They can't not be aware of what is going on. And why it's appalling. It's appalling that the church throws their support behind the offenders and not the victims. Why not call the lawyers and have the lawyers say, call authorities right now, keep that person there, they're going to be arrested, and then here's a link and here's some paperwork, fill this out, we're going to get some therapy for this victim, we are going to pay for the lawyers and the court cases so that we can persecute this person who has abused these people, and we are going to they have so much clout and they have so much money. Why can't they back the victims? Instead, they spend millions and millions of dollars to make them shut up and go away. And it's not okay at all. And what it makes me wonder is, what do the people in power have to cover? What are they afraid of if they don't back or, cover up these things? What are they afraid is going to be found? It really does make me just wonder how they feel, why they feel that offenders need protecting, and what that might mean about them. What are they covering for themselves? Because if it's not them, if they aren't the people who stand, who have any skin in the game, they're not the person, none of them are going to go directly to jail for backing an abused person. If they're not going to go to jail for that or lose status or anything like that, then what are they afraid of? And that makes me really think about that. Speaking of covering stuff, this is another thing that I recently found out. I feel lied to about it. I'm not going to lie. In 2018, October conference, the women's conference, President Nelson called for a 10-day social media fast for women, not men, but women, because women are always the ones who have to make the sacrifices. And he challenged us to read the entire Book of Mormon by the end of the year. That's in 3 months, okay? 3 months. And if you have ever read the Book of Mormon, you know that is quite a feat. It is a long book. Some parts of it are extremely boring. It's difficult to read it in 3 months. You can do it, but it takes a lot of dedication. So I didn't want to do it. At that time in 2018, I had a little business that I had online on Etsy. I would turn wood on a lathe, and I made baby rattles out of wood that had like the attached rings and stuff. It's kind of like my grandpa used to carve them by hand, and the rings would be just carved out of the same piece of wood, but they wouldn't come off. And so they were really beautiful. And I had this little Etsy business that I would do. And so I ran it online. I worked online, and so I couldn't really completely stay off of social media. I managed the Facebook page for the company that I worked for. And so I couldn't completely stay off of it, but I didn't want to, because of my little business that I ran from home. Losing, if you've ever had a little business, like a cottage industry kind of business, you know that like social media presence is extremely important, and you have to be posting daily, and it takes a lot of work. It's almost like a completely full-time job to manage that. And so I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to damage my business. Being offline for 10 days could make me irrelevant to where I'd have to rebuild that. It's difficult. So I didn't want to, and I wasn't going to at first. But then I decided that I needed to be obedient, and so I went for it. I did stay off social media for 10 days. I also decided that I was going to read the Book of Mormon cover to cover within 3 months. And I actually didn't start that until the end of October, because I was like, I've been reading the Book of Mormon with my kids for, it's taken me 2 years. I think at that point, I had little kids at that time. My oldest was 12, and my youngest was a year in 2018. She was a year old. By that time, I think like she was 15 months. And so we read it slowly. Every night we would read a chapter, a couple pages or something, but it took us a long time. And so we were almost finished with that. I was like, I'm not starting it over right now. I'm going to finish it with my family. So I was a little late starting on the Book of Mormon to read it cover to cover. But what I would do is, I decided I was going to do it. So I just was like, I listened to it on the LDS, what is it? The resources where you can bring up the app. And I listened to it while I turned the rattles, and I could listen to several hours of it, and then I'd listen to it while I cleaned and, while I folded laundry, those kinds of things. And honestly, Nelson telling me to read the scriptures then, like reading it cover to cover, was the beginning in 2018 of my faith crisis, because that's when I started to realize, when I was reading it just cover to cover without stopping or without just reading little bits of it here or there for lessons or whatever, reading it to cover was when I started being like, this is weird, this is wrong, this doesn't feel right, this isn't what we teach in the church. And so that's literally what started all of this. So thank you, Elder Nelson, or President Nelson. But even weirder, and I really typically, I don't really like to buy into conspiracy theories, but I'm going to buy into this one. I'm going to, and I feel like the conservative nature of the church, like I feel like they should jump on board. If they knew about this, I feel like they should, but they won't. They'll make excuses. But I didn't know this then. I do now. This entire thing, Nelson telling women to stay off of social media for 10 days, and then to also give them a rigorous challenge to read the Book of Mormon within the next 3 months altogether, was a way to get this, cover up Nelson's daughter and son-in-law having been accused of child abuse in the 80s. Child sex abuse and pornography. Okay, so the headlines about Brenda Miles and Richard Miles started on October 3rd, and President Nelson called for a fast, for the internet fast, and the book reading on the 6th of October, 3 days later. Now, I won't talk a lot about this. It's extremely heartbreaking and very suspicious. I don't do well with these kinds of things. They do literally break my heart. I feel it very physically, it makes me so sick. And then I don't sleep or feel good or anything for days and days. It just breaks my heart. So I won't talk a lot about the details. I will say that the book Paper Dolls is written about the whole situation. Names are changed, but there's a lot of information online about what it means. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it, so I'm not going to. But if you're interested, you can look it up. The case was dismissed in 2020 due to a statute of limitations. So they did get off the hook. But I have absolutely no doubt that the entire thing that started with a social media fast, and I will say this, that my bishop's wife, she was never really like a big social media person anyway, but after that point she never got back on social media. So I think that there probably are a good portion of women who never did go back to social media. The excuse was that there are bad things on social media and they make us compare ourselves to other people and everything, which is semi-true, I guess. Like, there's bad things on the internet, but there's also really good things. There's also resources like the news stories and things that covered his daughter's allegations of sex abuse. So, and that's not a good thing, but it is an awareness. Those are things that we have access to. And I do think that he didn't want us to have the access to it. And faithful women who were going to be off of social media and then would be spending a lot of time reading the Book of Mormon were not going to be looking for that information about his daughter. So yeah, look that up if you'd like to. He came on in and he, number 5, removed Uchtdorf from the presidency. He's still an apostle, obviously, but he was not in the first presidency anymore, which honestly, Uchtdorf is the only saving grace to the church right now. I adore him. I think he's wonderful. He is a breath of fresh air. He is liberal. He is, he's kind and loving. And I've never heard him talk about things I've never gotten the ick from him, and I think he's great. But he came in and he took him out of the presidency and replaced him with Oakes and with Eyring. I don't know. Eyring is whatever, but Oakes is just the worst. He's just the worst. Oh, and guess what? This is one of those things, talking ill about the Lord's anointed, like, I'm not supposed to do that. I'll get there. I'll get to it. Anyway, so number 6, Nelson lied about his plane crash story. He's told this story so many times. He's talked about it. You've heard it. It's a story about how, I didn't write down the date. I apologize. He told a story about how he was on like a smaller plane, and the engine blew up and there were flames coming out of the engine, and there was smoke, and there was an emergency, and they had to land in a field. And as they were crashing to their death, a lady next to him was screaming and crying, and then he went on to talk about how he was totally calm because he was ready to meet his maker and he knew that it would be okay. But people who don't believe in God or aren't right with the Lord, they're afraid of death. And it's made up, and they know it's made up because they found the plane records and everything. And while there was like something happened with the plane or whatever, there was no explosion, there was no fire, there was no landing in a field. They landed in an airport, and they had to and then the plane, they checked some things, and the plane took off. Everything was fine. Now, there's no real like witness or anything about who may or may not have been crying in the plane, and there's, as far as his story goes, I'm not even sure that there was any kind of indication whether or not she was any kind of religious. So, but I will tell you this. When I was young, when I was a little girl, I used to fly to Arizona and back all the time. It was like a half an hour flight from Utah to Arizona, and I'd stay with my grandma for a few weeks and they'd send me back, and I was by myself. I flew all the time, like usually like I would get those little pins, with the little the wings or whatever, and the flight attendant was always super sweet to me and everything. And I was a good kid. I was used to it. It wasn't a problem. My grandma or my mom, whoever was picking me up, would meet me at the gate, and it was not a problem. But I do remember there was one time I was coming home from my grandma's. And so I was sad. I always cried when I had to leave her. But I remember that there was a woman I guess the plane was a little bumpy, and it wasn't really super scary to me because I was used to it. I flew in planes a lot, and so it wasn't scary to me. I think I was young enough that I probably didn't really think a lot about death at all. I'm trying to think of how old I might have been. I would probably say maybe 5 or 6. And there was a woman that was across the aisle from me. So I was in the aisle seat, and there was the aisle and then the woman sitting next to me. And she was not hysterical by any means. But there were some bumpy things, and she was very visibly upset. She was gripping the seats, like the armrests, and she was kind of breathing heavy. And then there got to a point where she had a rosary, and she was holding a rosary, and she crossed herself and was saying prayers and stuff like that. And I was upset, and I was crying because I was leaving my grandma. And so I was sitting by this little boy and his dad, who were telling me, they were trying to talk to me. I think they thought I was afraid, but I just was sad. But they were very sweet, and they were talking to me about how they were going to Utah to pick up this new black lab puppy that they were excited to have, and her name, and they showed me pictures and everything. And then we started talking, and the plane evened out, got smoother, and I talked to this little boy and made friends with him, and everything was fine. But she was a religious person, not Mormon, if she was crossing herself and holding onto her rosary, but she was upset too. And like, not only is it just insulting to the intelligence of people that Nelson felt like he needed or could lie about this story and embellish it. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, a lot of people just say, everybody embellishes stories. Like, yeah, everybody does, okay? But he's using it as a faith-promoting story that is going to basically make somebody feel bad about sitting there and thinking, do I have a testimony? Do I feel safe dying today because I know where I'll go? You know, like it's really manipulative, and it's insulting to people who are atheists or another faith or something, that just they aren't afraid. Like, and even if you are afraid of dying, religious or not, like, why is that bad? I love my life. I love my family and my children. If I was going to die and I was on a plane and I saw it crashing and I was like upset about that and scared, why is that something that you would find a lack of a testimony anyway? Why should I be okay just dying? I don't want to. I'm not afraid of it, but I still don't want to. I would miss my children. I would miss my husband and my family, and I would miss wonderful things about this world. So why is that a bad thing? Why is it a horrible thing? Why would you tell this story to people who may be in a life-threatening situation and they don't feel like they can express that they're scared because they have to be okay with dying? This is so bizarre. It's just bizarre. And it was a lie. So you can look that up if you want to too. I don't have the details because, again, it's my experience. I'm not really necessarily here to give facts. I mean, I want to give facts. I just don't have the dates. I don't have the resources. There are places to find those. Obviously, facts are very important. Okay. In October, this is number 7, October 2018, again, right after President Nelson came right in and started just like making waves, he said that tithing will bring the poor out of poverty. This is so... Go back and listen to my shelf breaker about tithing, okay? It was a video number 2. But he says that tithing will bring poor out of poverty, and I'm reading some more here. Nelson stated, "We preach tithing to the poor people of the world because the poor people of the world have had cycles of poverty generation after generation. That same poverty continues from generation to another, from one generation to another, until people pay their tithing. It is living the law of tithing that will break the cycle of poverty. Those who live this law will join the millions of faithful members of the church who bear solemn and joyous testimony that the Lord keeps his promises to those who love him and keep his commandments." It's not true. It's not true. He doesn't say really exactly how paying tithing gets you out of poverty. However, he did go on to tell a story about a man. Oh, and that was in Tithing, a Blessing from Heavenly Father to Help Us on Our Mortal Journey. You can look that up, October 2018. But in that story, after he says this and says that it'll bring you out of poverty, he goes on to tell a story about a man in Africa who was going to school for engineering, I believe, and he needed very, very expensive materials for his course, to his degree, and I think he added up, he would have to save a certain portion of his paycheck for this many months in order to afford what was a programmable calculator. And it was very, very expensive. And so, but he wouldn't be able to do that if he paid his tithing. And so he decided that he was going to pay his tithing and be faithful. And then he said that shortly after paying his tithing, his bishop called him in to talk to him, and he was presented with a programmable computer that was 10 times better than the one he would have purchased himself if he hadn't paid tithing. And then he goes on to say that this showed that he passed the test of whether or not he loved and trusted God. it's just so, it's infuriating, okay? Because one, this isn't an example of actual poverty. Like it is like this man may have been in poverty, but the truth is he was still going to school. The problem that he cited was not that he wouldn't be able to buy food or pay for his home or, you know, provide his family with necessities. And it's true that you can still be in poverty and still making those ends meet, and things can still be like really super difficult. But the problem in this case wasn't even about those things that are like the basic necessities of surviving life. It was about expensive materials he needed for school so that he could, I presume this means that while he's going to school, he's bettering himself with education so that he can go on and get an engineering job, which will make him lots of money, and then he won't be in poverty anymore. Okay, real poverty would be people who can't even go to school, because you can't, again, not even real poverty in the sense that I want to say that if you can afford a home and you can afford to feed your family, that you're not in poverty. There is still a lot of difficulty in this economy that we're in today, and all times of life, all times of the world, there has been poverty. And so, like, if I'm not being eloquent, like, I'm sorry if I'm not being eloquent. I think you get what I'm saying, though, is that, like, he's implying that he's paying tithing, and so he's going to school and he's going to educate himself. But there are so many people who can't even afford to, like, feed their family, let alone go to school for an engineering degree. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So on top of that, even if it was a situation where people were in poverty and needed food and could get that from the bishop, because that's possible. You have to be paying tithing in order to get it from the bishop, to get food and things from your bishop. Then there's still this really, like, ridiculous thing where oh, sorry, the flies. Again, I'm in my beloved canyon, so they're here. But even if they could get that food from the bishop, they have to be paying their tithing. So they have food, fine, but they have less money, and they're giving it to the church, and it's making these people be reliant on the church in, you know, whatever way. But there's still less ability to get out of poverty when you're being given food by the church and you're really paying for it with your 10% tithing. So it really doesn't solve the problem. And just the whole thing, the whole implication that this doesn't happen for everybody either. You know, it's never happened for me, really. I talk about that again in my video number 2, which is my shelf breaker, which was tithing. You know, like, most times if I paid tithing and I didn't have enough left over, like, I didn't see more money. I didn't get a check from somewhere. The church or random people didn't drop off food somehow. I just had to not use money that I didn't have, you know, and it's fine. Like, that's not what I resent. What I resent is that the church teaches that your tithing is like this transactional thing, that you'll get blessings and you'll come out of poverty and you'll have more money and you'll be blessed and blah, 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 blah. It just doesn't work like that all the time. And then if you don't receive those blessings, then you're left wondering, well, what am I doing wrong? It's just a way for them to keep you, you know, reliant on them in their debt and stuff. President Nelson went on to, this number 8, changed the name of the church. A lot of people don't care about that. I didn't care about that. In 2018, when he changed the name and we started calling the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I absolutely adhered to that. I think that, too, one of the big reasons that that I did employ that language, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I shortened it to LDS. I don't think that they liked that either. They wanted us to say the entire thing, because I very much respect people's pronouns, and I very much respect the things people want to be called. And it just comes down to that. I called the church by the name it wanted to be called because I also felt that, you know, if somebody was non-binary or transgender or something and they wanted to be called something else, then I would call them that too. And it just kind of goes hand in hand. It's the same kind of a thing. Now I call myself ex-Mormon, and I realize that that does go against what the church wants to be called. And I realize that, you know, like maybe that can be seen as like disrespectful now. I don't think it's disrespectful because, you know, this is the space I'm in now. I'm in the space of being an ex-Mormon, and that's the term that is typically used by my community at this time. And so while members of the church may still call themselves LDS or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I consider myself an ex-Mormon, and that's what I consider myself. And because I have respected other people's pronouns and other people's names, I do feel like it's within reason for me to expect that to be used instead of ex-member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like, that's just so weird. Ex-LDS, I don't know, whatever. I am not by any means going to like hold somebody to that. Like if they're like, oh yeah, you're an ex-Mormon or you're an ex-LDS member, right? You're an ex-member. I'm not going to be like, yes, I'm an ex-Mormon and I expect you to call me this because of respect, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not going to do that. I feel like the name change in the first place was ridiculous. And there's plenty on that as well. Like Hinckley, Monson, they spent billions and billions of dollars, maybe not billions, I don't know, millions and millions of dollars on campaigns for I Am a Mormon and Mormon ads and stuff like that. And, you know, it really was just an opinion from President Nelson, which just feeds into like the whole idea of like, how do you trust him as a prophet when he just changes things because he feels like it? That's another video. I'll do that sometime. This one is so weird to me, okay? This is number 9. In 2021, Russell M. Nelson took a 6-foot slab of granite marble from the restoration of the Salt Lake City Temple to use as a headstone. 6 foot, guys, 6 feet tall, okay? It is there already in the Salt Lake City Cemetery where his late wife Dancel is already buried, and it has his name engraved on it, Dancel's name, and also his current wife Wendy. They're already there. They are at Dancel's gravesite in the Salt Lake City Cemetery. There's a plaque on it that says, "This monument was crafted of stone from the Salt Lake Temple 2020 restoration." This monument, guys, all this to say, like, okay, this is along with his 95th birthday and 100th birthday celebrations, and Governor Cox naming the September 9th in Utah Russell M. Nelson Day. It's just, it reeks of narcissism and megalomania. It is so crazy to me, okay? It's just weird, and it's just so narcissistic. Anyway, all of this to say, with Monson, like when Monson was out of commission for the most part and Nelson was acting for him, I 100% believe that Oaks has taken over. Now we're getting to kind of the meat of all of this. Well, Russell M. Nelson surely is homophobic. Dallin H. Oaks is more. And I feel very strongly that Russell M. Nelson is in on it, But most likely Oakes is the perpetrator behind the August trans issues in the handbook. And it was revealed this week that Oakes is also calling for more excommunications. Bill Reel with RFM, Radio Free Mormon, he did a podcast of this on video with slides, which you can see the entire thing. It's supposed to be confidential. Luckily, there are PMOs, physically and mentally out, that are in leadership positions in the church, and so they send this stuff. It has been verified many times, not just this one time. There was the possibility that it could have possibly been like a fake just set up or whatever, but it has been confirmed many times. So you should go and watch that for all of the details and all of the information on that. But what I'm going to do a couple of just brief takeaways. One is that he says that the more disciplinary meetings, the fewer that will be needed in the long run. And I'm not sure exactly what he means by that and what that means to him. I guess I don't really want to put words in his mouth or whatever, but you're like, yeah, like it's obvious to me that the more disciplinary councils and the more excommunications that there will be fewer because of a few things. First of all, if you excommunicate everybody who speaks out against you, then they're not going to be there to speak out for you against you anymore. They're gone. They're excommunicated. You don't have to do it again, right? Okay. But then also, like, it teaches with fear. It teaches a lesson to everybody else about what will happen to them if they speak out against the church. If they have, it's not just that too, like it's, you know, like any kind of like serious sin, they will, you know, it teaches them to be afraid. And so they won't speak out. And then also they won't confess it. If it's like a sexual sin or something like that, where an endowed member might, you know, a return missionary comes home from his mission or her mission, they get a boyfriend or girlfriend, they have sex, and then they talk to their bishop about it and repent. They are endowed members, which means that according to Oakes, he would want them to not just repent with their bishop, maybe not take the sacrament or something like that, but he wants more disciplinary councils and more excommunications. He says that it's about a repentance process and penitent spirit, and it's not a punishment, blah blah blah. But that's bullshit. So again, you can listen to Bill Reel. He's better at it than me. But if they do those things and they know that they're going to be excommunicated for it, it'll either stop them from doing it in the first place. I doubt it, because we are human and we have human urges and human instincts. Sexual reproduction is one of the few instincts that humans have left. And it's a natural, normal thing that people do. But if you have premarital sex or, it's called fornication, if you are outside of marriage in any capacity, this is what he's calling for. And so in addition to not doing it because they're afraid, they also may just not repent of it. And that's not any better, because like, I don't personally feel like people need to repent of that, like myself. I don't think people need to go and confess those kinds of things to a man that sits there and judges them. I just don't think that's necessary. But if people aren't repenting of those things, even if whether it's because they're not doing it or whether they're just not comfortable bringing it to their bishop because they fear the consequences, then the church has statistics that says our church members are so good. And it looks good on them, even though it's not really good. So, you know, people who are afraid, though, people who are afraid are controllable. And that's what it comes down to. I also think Two, I think that so many people are leaving the church that he believes that if they can get in front of it and kick people out before they have a chance to leave the church, that the church will look less like people are running away from it and that the church is in charge. Simple enough. Disciplinary councils and therefore disfellowship and even excommunication happens for serious sins. And what are those sins that he wants more strictly disciplined? It's what I'm doing right now. It's speaking of the Lord's anointed. It goes against my covenants. I'm breaking covenants. It's something that they don't tell you this before you go to the temple. It's one of those things that they don't, members largely most of the time don't have informed consent, because we're not supposed to talk about what happens in the temple. We're supposed to be quiet about that. But one of the covenants we make in the temple is that we won't speak ill of the Lord's anointed. And that's really difficult, because what if we get an unhinged prophet? President Benson comes to mind. That's another video entirely itself as well, but he was absolutely crazy. And, what if we get somebody who's telling us that the wrong things? Like, I feel like President Nelson is telling us the wrong things. I feel like Oaks is absolutely going to come in here and have a reign of terror and tell us the wrong things. And so, like, what if we have somebody, we can't speak ill of the Lord's anointed. John DeLynn was excommunicated for this, and now Nemo the Mormon, he's being excommunicated or has a disciplinary council. I guess he hasn't been excommunicated yet. I don't know exactly where that will go, but literally that's what it is going on, is that they were excommunicated or have been called to disciplinary councils because they are speaking against the Lord's anointed, which is the prophet and the church in general, the organization. The September 6th, you can Google them too. 6 people who were excommunicated for speaking out against the church. Speaking against church policy or doctrine, this also goes along with speaking of Lord's anointed. But Natasha Helfer, she's a therapist who was excommunicated for speaking out against punishment for masturbation and such, those kinds of things. She's amazing. You should follow her. She is such great insight, and she's a wonderful. I've never gone to her as a therapist, but I have very, very much enjoyed, reading her content and everything. Sorry, I'm up here. People drive up here all the time. Anyway, not paying tithing, not obeying the word of wisdom. And sexual sins, of course. I talked about this a little bit ago, like at the beginning of this whole thing, where, as an example, if somebody is going to have a sexual sin and then they don't want to repent to their bishop because they're afraid of what kind of disciplinary counsel might happen to them. But that would be any member at all. I know teenagers who have been disfellowshipped for sexual sins, including heavy petting, actual sex, and even masturbation. So sex outside of marriage, if you aren't married, just like if you're a single person and you have sex, or if you're endowed, meaning you've gone through the temple, you have garments, etc., and or like affairs, for example. And maybe things like having affairs should be disciplined to some degree, but statistically, they don't excommunicate or discipline child molesters and abusers. There are, and I'm not going to cite these, I'm not going to cite them. There's places you can research them, you can find them. But in many cases, there are records of abusers who have been then promoted within the church. They've become bishops, they've become stake presidents, they've gotten leadership positions after being accused. They also still haven't excommunicated Chad and Lori Daybell, who literally murdered multiple people, and which included children. And they say it's a matter of confidentiality, so they don't announce these things or whatever. Sometimes we don't know about whether or not they've been excommunicated because they say, again, the confidentiality thing. But when you're excommunicating people who do horrible things and they're in the news and everybody knows what they did and what kind of what kind of horrible crime you've committed, then and everybody already knows that, then frankly, I feel like it's more important for the church to say, we're distancing ourselves from these people. They have done a heinous crime. They have hurt people. They have done horrible things that we don't feel that they can repent from just by just coming back to church and being active, then they, I don't feel like that's a matter of confidentiality. Like, it shouldn't be. It's not. It's protecting abusers instead of protecting victims. It goes back to all of that again. And the people who do those things, I don't know. It's an emotional torture and alienation for people who do things that, to have these disciplinary actions for people who just do normal human things and then are made to feel bad about them. Like, this is it's alienating, like, I don't know. As far as speaking of the Lord's anointed, ill of the Lord's anointed, I suppose that I am in danger of possibly getting excommunicated. I think they have bigger fish to fry. I'm just a little fish in a small pond. I now have, what is this, the 8th video or something like that. Like, I'm not a big threat, I guess, but as far as like my little ward in my neighborhood is concerned, it's entirely possible that I'm the biggest threat there is. And so there's that possibility. I'm really hoping to beat them to the finish line. We have printed our paperwork. We need to go get it notarized. I am doing my best to get my records removed anyway, so then they can't excommunicate me. But if they were to excommunicate me, I wouldn't even show up to the disciplinary council. I'd be like, please remove them. Go ahead. Remove my name. Please remove the rest of my family as well. I'm fine with that. I wouldn't even show up. I don't need to go there and be humiliated by a board of men who don't know me or my experiences. And that would be my experience. That would be my opinion. However, my heart breaks for people who didn't want to be excommunicated from the church. I've been listening to the excommunication of John DeLynn. He had posted those back a couple of years ago, and I've been listening to them, it's just heartbreaking because he didn't want to be, and Nemo the Mormon does not want to be excommunicated. And so my heart breaks for them because it is humiliating and alienating, and I want what they want for themselves. I do feel that it is a secret combination. I am going to do another video about secret combinations in the church, but they do these things in secret. They don't let people record it. They don't let you know about what it's about. They just tell you, your content, what you're talking about there, so they won't tell you what it is that you're being excommunicated for. It's just about control, and it's absolutely one of those secret combinations. So Oaks is about to take over. I don't know how much longer President Nelson is going to live. I by no means wish any harm to anybody at all. But he's 100 years old. So the reality of it is that he's very, very up there in age. But Oaks is 92. Assuming that he takes over soon, and, he could still spend the better part of a decade. If he lives as long as Nelson, he could spend the better part of a decade reigning terror on this earth. And, I am like kind of interested in like a really weird train wreck kind of way to see what kind of damage that he does to the church and to the people in it. I really hope that people are willing to look into these things and to kind of see these things and maybe build healthier grounds, or find healthier grounds to build their foundations on. I don't get it though. I feel like these men in their 90s, 100s, even their 80s or 70s, like, I'm not going to lie, like, when I am that age, I am going to want to be at home. I'm going to be wanting to visit with my grandchildren. I'm going to want to be doing my hobbies and enjoying really delicious food. And I'm going to want to be doing the things that I want to do to enjoy the last little bit that I have on this earth. Not not building up kingdoms for myself and power over other people. I don't even want to be in charge and in control of people now, and I'm 42. I don't want to do that. I can't imagine having the energy to be so hateful and so in control when I'm in my 90s. I just can't imagine that. And I feel like these men should be put out to pasture. That sounds awful. I feel like they should be let to rest in their old age. I feel like they should be allowed to go and live the rest of their lives in a very comfortable way, instead of traveling all the time, instead of speaking all the time, and instead of imposing ridiculous rules and revelations that aren't even applicable to the generations they're affecting anymore. How can they be in touch with people these days, like now, the people who are coming of age now? How can they be in touch with any of them when they've spent their entire lives in a fairly wealthy little bubble that doesn't have poverty, that doesn't have, you know, any kind of discomfort, any kind of life experience? Like, yeah, he's 100 years old, he's had a lot of life experience, but only in a very specific bubble. And I don't feel like men like that, men that age, should be leading this church. I just don't. So I guess there it is. I was nervous to share that, but I made it through. I think I did it okay without saying and without like getting lost in my papers too many times. There were a couple of like kind of suspicious, I don't know, people who kind of slow down. I get a little nervous when I'm talking, when people slow down. I'm in the middle of very conservative Mormon Utah. And so when people slow down and they've got their windows down and I'm here talking, I get a little bit nervous that they're going to hear me. I don't like confrontation. I guess I just like overthink the worst or whatever. So I'm sorry if any of that happened or that if any of that is awkward. Of course, as always, please feel free to leave me comments. Please like, follow, share. Let me know what you think about things. You can send me emails. Any email that I reference in my videos would be done confidentially. I won't tell anybody who you are. My email is Brae, BRAE, .wordsofxmormon. That's words of X-E-X. So it's words of EX Mormon @gmail.com. So bray.wordsofxmormon@gmail.com. And if you'd like to send, comments, experiences, requests for, videos or questions about what I feel about things, any of those types of things, I would love to hear from you. Thank you again so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and you have a really wonderful week.